for the first time, it is great to see you. And for those of you that are returning, it is also great to see you. Super exciting to have everyone here on this September afternoon. Really quickly, our agenda is going to be the usual introduction for San Antonio Pug leaders, how to get involved, a very quick update on the Fabric and Power BI blogs to see what those monthly updates were for September. And then we're going to go into the main presentation, combining data from different sources in Power BI with Nathan. And then feel free to ask any questions and we'll close with comments. All right, I am Chris Almont. I am one of the co-leaders for the San Antonio Fabric Plus user group. And I am a data analytics manager here at GVEC. We're an electric co-op. And Antonio is not, Antonio unfortunately is not able to join us this round. He had another meeting scheduled at the same time, but he will be with us next month. And same thing for Rayanne and Jason. So for today, how can you get involved? Well, we're growing and we are continuing to grow and we want you to be a part of us. So there are a couple of different ways that you can get involved. Our primary channel of communication is Meetup. We also have a LinkedIn profile. We do have a Microsoft Fabric community space. That one is not used as much, but we are trying to get that one, get a little more momentum going on our community space. And then also for YouTube, all of our sessions we do record, and then we will post the recording on YouTube for later viewing. And you can also view past sessions. All right, so a little bit about us and save the date. So who are we? Well, whether you're part of the team or you're flying solo, we're here for you. Really, we're just a bunch of folks that are here to collaborate and learn from each other. Topics will vary from month to month, and we'll go into guided deep dive sessions into Power BI and Microsoft Fabric and other related technologies. And really, the ultimate goal is to learn from each other, to grow, and just really continue investing into each other. We do meet every Wednesday, or I'm sorry, we do meet the last Wednesday of the month at 12 p.m. And there is a link here for the registration or for our meetup group on where to register. And you can find all of our upcoming session and past session information there as well. All right, so community impact. We are looking for future speakers. We're always looking for folks that are interested in presenting. And we have a volunteer speaker form that you can fill out. And we actually had a couple folks that expressed an interest, and we're putting them on the schedule. So super excited to get some more folks to present on various topics. Well, what are some of those topics that y'all have mentioned that you'd like to learn about? One of the topics included data visualization and best practices, which Benny covered last week. She was all the way from Austria. So that was a super exciting presentation. And then today we have Nathan, who's not quite as far. He's here in the States, and he's joining us to talk a little bit about connecting disparate data sources. So super excited about that presentation too, and very applicable to Microsoft Fabric and what makes Fabric shine. And then on deck, we have advanced Power BI, optimizations and performance tuning, Power BI fundamentals, DAX and modeling. Real world projects, there was a expressed interest in just knowing real world projects and what some of the different companies or use cases were, to review those case studies and how they solved those how they came up with those solutions for those problems. And then Copilot and AI features. There's a ton of information out there. Some of it's a little confusing. So we'll help to shed some light and remove the confusion on how Copilot and AI features worked within Power BI and Fabric. And then also within Microsoft Fabric, you have the lakehouses, data flows, and pipelines. And what's all that about, and how does that fit into your workflow or even your architecture? And then governance, security, and data compliance, and then embedded analytics. So those are some of the future topics that we'll be presenting on in the near future. All right, so really quickly, some Fabric and Power BI updates. The slide deck, we'll get that situated so that you can click on those links for the monthly updates. There's also a video that you can watch that has the updates where I believe Fabric is video, or the video for Fabric has Patrick, and then I think Adam is doing the video for the update for just Power BI. So you can watch the two of them go through the updates if you don't want to read it, but they're doing a really big push on the deployment pipelines, the APIs, real-time intelligence database. A lot of it's very similar to last month, and they're just continuing to expand on it for both Fabric and Power BI. So without going into too much details, there's truly just too much, or so many different updates going on that is just too much to list. All right, so sped through that, got it in about 5 minutes, and that was the goal. And we're going to shift gears to our main topic. Nathan, you are up, sir. Tell us a little bit about combining data from different sources in Power BI.
I'd be happy to. And if you don't mind, I'll take over the screen share.
It is all yours, sir.
All right. If you could verify once you see it that you've got a big blue slide showing.
Yep, you're good.
Cool. Okay, we are rocking and rolling then. Hi, everybody. My name is Nathan Nelson. I am calling you from the great state of Iowa, where it's 72 degrees and sunny today. Thank goodness that has not been the case for the rest of the week, but we'll take it where we can get it. First of all, a big thanks to Chris and a thanks to the group for allowing me to speak a little bit on combining from different data sources inside of Power BI. Hopefully this will combine a bunch of skills that are good from everybody that's maybe a beginner inside of Power BI all the way to some more advanced things, and then cumulatively create something that maybe is a little bit different and reflects some best practices that we've employed over at CIPCO. I will also note that I'm going to keep an eye on the chat as best as I can, but Chris, I'm going to need a little help with moderation. So if there's a question that comes in midstream, which is totally fine, just give me a heads up if I'm missing it somewhere. So with that, let me give a little bit of background about myself. Once again, I mentioned my name is Nathan. I am the Senior Business Intelligence and Application Developer for an organization called CIPCO, which is the Central Iowa Power Cooperative. We are an energy generation and transmission company. And what that means is that unlike the distribution cooperatives for power that we serve, which is on the map that you can see on your screen, since 1946, that means that we've been generating the electricity that gets handed over to those distribution organizations that goes eventually to people's homes along a whole bunch of different rural areas inside of the state of Iowa. We serve about 300,000 different residents inside of the state of Iowa through those members of our cooperative, the ones that you see on the screen there. And it's a little bit more than 13,000, probably getting closer to 14,000 now, commercial and industrial accounts. So businesses, farms, things along that line. For those that are operating inside of the energy world, there's always a question of what our demand peak is. And it just so happens that this slide is out of date. I believe last month we actually exceeded our previous peak of about 650 megawatts. So we are growing as far as our energy footprint, as I'm sure many of you have heard inside of the news that energy is becoming very, very well used nowadays. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about that. Today, what I want to cover is a whole bunch of different topics of combining data together, focusing on 3 major areas. Number one, just kind of covering, hey, Power BI data sources, how they operate, where's some advantages that can be used, kind of a basic overview of what those sources are, and just some general awareness as far as that's concerned. Then I want to get into query management of some different techniques that we use over at CIPCO to be able to manage queries effectively when we're using multiple data sources. And we'll get into some details on that in a little bit. And then finally, the big one that I'm sure a lot of people probably spend a lot of time on is when you're bringing data in from different sources, how are you you establishing relationships between maybe some resources that don't have some common elements. One big one that operates inside of CIPCO's world is the item of time, and I'll get into a little bit more detail on that in a minute as well. So from the basic view of things, if you are operating in an organization that maybe has a single ERP or a single CRM, you may not be exposed very often to situations where you're developing a report that is using anything more than a single data source. So if you're connecting over to a single SQL server or Oracle, and that kind of is the area that you're bringing all your information for your business from, or maybe that's the area that you operate in, you may not be exposed to situations where you're bringing in combined data sources very often. But I'm telling you, there's a lot of value, especially in my world, of being able to bring things together by blending sources. It brings a little bit more expertise, a little bit more knowledge of multiple systems and how to bring data together rather than just bringing tables that maybe already have a relationship inside of your main database set. I did want to just show, this is as of May, that if you haven't considered bringing data in from another system, another source, obviously we've probably all experimented with bringing in information from Excel or maybe something from SharePoint, something online or a standard database, but the list of potential sources of what you could be bringing inside of your Power BI reports is extensive. And I can tell you that I've tried a lot of these. There's no way I've had an opportunity to check them all because they cover all sorts of different data connections. And it's a long list. And it just so happens that if you happen to be an expert and you're going, gosh, but this isn't exactly my situation, there is a learning path produced by Microsoft to be able to create your own data connector and say, hey, maybe I operate with this unique system that's combining a couple different database technologies together. I need to be able to connect in a very special way. Well, consider making your own connector. I will tell you, I've been into the training content a little bit. It's not easy, but I can see a lot of wins. I'm actually pursuing one right now that I think will wind up being rewarding if I can get to the end of that process. So taking a look at different data sets, we kind of almost have to put a demonstration scenario in front of it to really, really grasp and see some hands-on experience with that. Inside of the world of energy, our scenario, which is a very real scenario, we deal with this quite a bit, is we have businesses that approach us and say, hey, I want to work with the G&T level because I want to operate as what's called a demand resource or demand response resource, or DRR. And basically what that means is my energy rates, my power rates that I want to pay for is going to be influenced by the cost of demand for power inside of the market. Now, I'm sure a lot of you over in the San Antonio area are familiar with whenever ERCOT hits the headlines, there's usually a whole bunch of question marks that come along with hey, what's the price of power at this point in time? This is exactly the scenario that we're talking about. Especially in the state of Iowa, we have people that are looking to be demand response resources, or DRRs, from organizations a lot of time like cryptocurrency mining. We also have data centers that want to be able to respond to that demand by typically reducing their power output. So somebody that can dynamically change the amount of power that they need from the grid, and they get a monetary reimbursement against their bill for being able to be that resource to the grid. So there's a really, really important use case inside of our industry to be able to say, okay, we've got two different pieces of information that we need to be able to combine. We've got the power that's being used and also this thing called an LMP, or locational marginal pricing. That's controlled by organizations like ERCOT, or in the Midwest, it's referred to as MISO, which I'll put the abbreviation on the screen in just a little bit. The really simple part of it is, hey, prices are time sensitive. That's really what it all boils down to, meaning that the cost of energy at the beginning of the day might be different from the cost of energy in the middle of the day. So that's really what LMPs are all about, and it's a demand and response system. So going further into the actual data, What we're really taking a look at is two disparate data sources that we need to combine together. We've got meter data, in other words, the energy or kilowatts. In this case, we're actually talking megawatts, but many of you see kilowatts on your bill, so we're going to keep it that way. But megawatts used over a course of time, as well as the LMP or locational marginal price for that data, which is actually stored inside of a CSV file. However, that CSV file is located online. And just to take a look at, hey, how does this LMP information work? I thought I'd just bring up very quickly a view of what's happening in Texas as of the 1 o'clock hour, which hasn't quite hit yet. Just knowing that, hey, we've got different prices in different areas across the state. It's the same thing in Iowa, same thing inside of the Midwest. So we're reaching out to this organization to be able to pull in information through a CSV that's published basically every day, or if you're dealing in real-time LMPs every hour. So bringing those two different data sources, fairly simple stuff, knowing that we could be bringing in from a whole bunch of different resources. We're going to keep it simple to take a look at some process. Now, there's a big challenge inside of this. The meter information that CIPCO collects is typically on a 15-minute interval scale. However, the LMP data is typically hourly data. And to add things to a little more complexity, we have no primary key fields. The only thing that we really have is time. So the date and the hour of the day or the time of the day that we need to be able to combine these two disparate sources on. So we're going to employ a couple different techniques inside of this demonstration. And I'm going to refer back over to our agenda of different topics. So we talked a little bit about Power BI data sources, just acknowledging that there's a whole bunch of different things that we could combine and gain some value for our reporting out of. I want to talk a little bit more about query management. And really the only good way of doing that is by going into a demonstration file, which I'm going to bring up right here. And so I've got kind of a very, very simple visualization inside of Power BI right here, where I've got the hour, and it's referred to as hour ending inside of the energy industry typically, because that way we can count 24 hours a day instead of starting, as most data scientists know, we usually start at 0. That's not something that operates inside of the industry. So when you see 24, don't freak out. We're just counting 24 hours in a day. By that state, we've also got the LMP, or the price for a megawatt hour of energy, as well as the amount of megawatts that was recorded onto a meter, or in this case, a couple of different meters over the course of that hour. And then finally, a total price against that value. Now, I've already laid this out so we can take a look at an hourly summary as well as that 15-minute summary. But how we got there is a little bit different than just doing a simple pivot or something that we're just doing summarization. And there's some reasons behind that. Let me go a little bit into the query editor and just kind of dig into some details. So first of all, you may notice if you're taking a look at the actual information over on the left-hand side of how these queries are organized, one thing that we do at CIPCO a lot is we try our best to parameterize the different systems and different connections that we're using. So for example, we actually set a server name for SQL connections. We actually set the database name, and then we've also got things like the date that we're using inside of our LMP download, and the node or the location that we're trading information for prices at. We try and parameterize as much as possible. And here's why. If we take a look at our major systems, in this case, it's our metering system, we actually connect to a whole bunch of different systems. And right now, what we're taking a look is test systems on development servers, some of which are actually going to be going away pretty soon. So I am happy to be able to share some of those pieces of information with you. And how we employ that, if you aren't using those, is inside of a connection. Once we've established that connection, we actually replace parts of our source connections with those parameters. One of the areas that this becomes really, really simple to be able to see is if you're bringing in a web source, getting back to different sources. So specifically, if you're taking a look at web sources, you'll notice that there's the option inside of the advanced area to be able to connect to a URL using different parts, and they've got parameterization built right into that source. The point being, if you're not utilizing parameterization, you're kind of locked into how that query was written. If somebody needs to change something, then they actually have to go in and alter the query as opposed to just changing a parameter. For those of you that are big fantasy football team users, just be aware I use this exact same process to be able to query all the different teams on my fantasy football league. It's really helpful to be able to find out who's got what. So that's kind of a fun aside on there. The second thing that you may notice inside of this development for the query set is that I'm actually organizing these using groups. It's a fairly simple element, but if you're not using groups, you're doing yourself a disservice, especially when you're combining from different areas. So in this case, I've actually grouped together all of the different queries that deal with the meter interval data, the stuff that's coming from that SQL database, and the LMP data, which is that CSV that's coming from there. So I can organize things different ways. I typically try and group things together based off of the source. The value behind that is if there's a problem with the source, it's really, really easy to identify. If there are errors happening in there, that's a really big clue of, oh, something at the source may have changed. Maybe it's offline. Maybe there was an update that changed different field settings inside of my tables. Maybe something was renamed and I just can't find it anymore. That, along with taking a look at parameters to be able to manage different connections, winds up being very helpful for troubleshooting. Next up, what I want to talk about a little bit, and I'm going to check the chat really quick before I shift gears here. I think we're good. Whenever we're pulling in information, if those of you that are pulling in, especially from SQL services, may have noticed that inside of your different steps to be able to alter anything, a lot of times what I find is that I'll bring in some source data and I'll apply a whole bunch of filters and sorting and some simple transformations to my data. When that happens, and whenever we see, gosh, you know what, some of these things are pretty fundamental, I wonder if I can optimize my connection information by pushing that transformation back to Chris's slide from when we started. How can we push that transformation upstream and closer to the data? Well, here's one little trick. If you haven't found this already or haven't been told about it, inside of your different steps, if you right click on your steps, usually I use that to rename, but you may also notice two specific options, and I want to point out one of them first. There's this item that says View Native Query, and you'll notice that each different step, if it's some simple stuff that is easy to translate into, in this case, SQL, I might have an option to be able to view the native query. And I'm kind of going through each step to find out, I've got a custom step here. That option is now grayed out inside of the View Native Query area, meaning that the previous step is something that I could do all these different steps, the transformations prior to this custom element, back up at the source. So if I choose to view the native query, it's actually writing the SQL code for me that I could push against my SQL system. So I could take this code directly, simply copy it, and I've got one that's already optimized, but you can see I've got a lot less steps because I pushed that optimization into my SQL statement at the beginning. That's really good for filtering, sorting. It does shave anywhere from a few milliseconds to maybe even a few seconds off of your query by doing that transformation back over at the source system. Because we're usually taking a look at select statements, not really a big burden either way, but it is an opportunity if you're taking a look at just getting that little tweak of extra performance out of your area. Another one that actually I have found a lot of value is if I find that I need to do some transformation on that data that I've already extracted. If you are duplicating your information by taking a look at a query and saying, well, I really kind of need a table like that, but I need to do a couple things to that, and I don't want to lose the information I already have, a lot of times people go in and say, well, I'm not really sure how this is going to go, so I'm going to go ahead and make a duplicate of that query, which does get optimized, but occasionally, depending on how those changes go, can lead to querying your data twice. So what I frequently recommend, and we use a lot whenever we're making alterations, is we'll get the baseline information extracted from that query, and then we'll do what's called a reference point. And all that's doing is just saying, hey, I'm going to use the source for this new transformation of data as my original table. kind of like parameterizing your source as well, but we're simply using another query for it. So if you're not taking advantage of that tool, hopefully you've already run into it before. You should. It does save a little bit of time and a little bit of storage as well, especially when you're talking about pushing things into the BI or Fabric web service. I'll pause right there. Any questions over here? Don't see any. So let's kind of shift gears then and talk about relationships. So we talked about query management of getting all of my data lined up here, and that's great. But if I'm combining two different sources or multiple sources, it's not very helpful unless I can start combining things. And one of the things that I brought up earlier is we've got two major challenges inside of this scenario of we've got different time scales, and we also don't have any keys inside of our table information. So let's kind of slip back to some tools or some techniques that we use over at CIPCO to resolve that issue. So first off, I want to talk about keys. One of the things that we really do a lot, especially when we're taking a look at different timetables, is we'll do custom values to be able to combine different elements to create an artificial key on both sides of those different connections. A lot of times when you're bringing in things from a single point, you might be able to say, okay, just to go ahead and inherit the relationships that are already built in there. Whenever you run into an extract from multiple data sources, it's very, very common to find out that you don't have a common key or you needed to translate a key for different groupings, something that you can actually associate that data with. We do the same thing. And the way we do it on timescales is we take a look at the hour ending. So when we're taking a look at 15-minute data, we actually isolate the hour that it comes from. And once again, we're going 1 through 24 instead of 0 through 23 like you might see on a clock. So this is going to look a little bit weird. But we're taking a look at the hour ending identifier inside of our data and then combining that with the date for that hour ending, which is calculated a little bit differently. If Chris needs to go into the specifics on how hour endings affect dates, we could probably have a side conversation for, I'm sure, most of the rest of the afternoon, but we won't go too far into it. So essentially what I'm establishing is a relationship value at the end that says, hey, I'm going to take a look at a formatted date because we're doing year, month, day, hour ending 18, but I'm applying that against all of the 15-minute intervals inside of the time scale. Similarly, over inside of the CSV, even though it's kind of inherent inside of that data, I'm going to go ahead and create a custom relationship value. And by the way, just to kind of enterprise on where some of that parameter management is, I'm making a reference back to the data date that I'm pulling from that parameter, which is very, very handy, not only for getting it from the source, but I can then refer to it back again. I frequently find parameters get multiple uses, especially when dealing with dates and times. That allows me for a common table that I can be able to kind of bring things together on. So if I take a look at my source information and then, where is it here? Just looking for the right query. I haven't been in here for a little bit here. So there's my custom relationship. Yep. Okay. So, and I wanted to make sure I was referring to the right table. So the value out of being able to build those relationships is, you'll notice I'm not using a merge here. I'm not trying to get to a single value table. Instead, I'm going to keep those together. And because I've also used a reference back to our previous process of referencing and splitting queries into two different things. Oh, and I forgot to mention, if you want to do a reference to it, or if you're taking a larger query, the same thing can be done by splitting, since I put that inside of the notes here, to be able to extract the previous steps. And that accomplishes the same thing of saying, okay, I've got my core query as well as my referenced query. It does the exact same thing, but from two different places. Once I've got my data completed, I'm going to go ahead and close that. let's take a look at the relationship view of what it creates. So you'll notice that I've got my original table of information, and then I've also got my split table, my referenced table. That relationship is already established because of the fact that I made that reference inside of my query editor. And then I've added, using my custom relationship values, a connection over to the CSV, or that LMP data, to be able to make a combination. So we're actually using a whole bunch of different skills all at the same time. We're taking a look at parameters. We're organizing it based on source. We're using some native query views to be able to optimize our queries. And then we're splitting, which establishes a new relationship, and then combining it back over to a segregated data resource, in this case, using a one-to-many relationships. Be very, very wary of one-to-ones, just FYI. If you're running into one-to-one relationships, that always gives me pause to make sure that is exactly what I want inside of a relationship type. And then that allows me to get back over to the visualization, where I can now take a look at a summarization based off of a 24-hour day, much like I would see if I was starting on the LMP side of things. Or I can take a look at individual costs against that particular hour for each 15-minute segment. Here's the value out of that. What I can also do is, if I'm taking a look at maybe a rate study, or if inside of our industry, we frequently take a look at, like, okay, where's that peak information of usage on something? I can now isolate down to hours, but if I want to take a look at a time of day, so let's just make it the afternoon, I can start to really take a good look at not only the pricing per hour, but where that peak usage is. And in this particular case, I can isolate and say, okay, so a little after 1:15 on this day, I can use that as a starting point to see if there's a trend for this particular meter, if there's periods right after lunch, right about where we are right now, where additional costs come into play. And that gives me a whole bunch of options for decision makings. So kind of going to the beginning here and going full circle again of some of the techniques that's used at CIPCO. And hopefully I've given a decent example of a whole bunch of these different ones. So when we're doing query management on different Power BI data sources, we frequently use parameters to manage system connections. We try and organize based off of those sources so they're easier to troubleshoot. Whenever possible, to be able to optimize our elements, we use native query views to be able to extract previous information or split elements, and then use that to be able to reference different data sources so that split makes sense. Last but not least, inside of relationship, don't be afraid to use artificial keys. Keys are not common everywhere, especially when you're pulling from disparate systems. That's totally fine, or translation keys if you need translation tables. And then last but not least, be aware that when you're using some of these techniques, you may automatically be able to get some relationship types, specifically one-to-many when you're doing references, and also one-to-ones if for some reason maybe you're splitting a single table. But be wary that when you're taking a look at one-to-one relationships, there might be something inside of your data source that you need to reevaluate. When you do all of these things, hopefully that leads you to an opportunity to make a Power BI report that takes advantage of your data sources and gives your users something that they can really do some super analysis against. And with that, I will stop there and go to questions. And Chris, I'll let you navigate this since you know the group better than I do.
Awesome job, Nathan. I appreciate it. That was a fantastic presentation and great slide deck.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
So I'll give we'll give the group a moment to digest, and it looks like we got Alex typing a question.
Okay.
And then I've got a couple questions I'll throw in if needed.
Actually, I can go. Nathan, I have a question about data lake. Can we bring similarly like a Tableau or Power BI to one data lake? Is it possible?
Are you talking about establishing a data lake from multiple sources to be able to use in both Power BI and Tableau, or are you
Yes, sir.
talking the other way around?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
I will tell you my experience in Tableau is a little bit on the limited side. However, what I have found is very useful is to be able to take a look at like a data flow Gen 2, excuse me, where you're using essentially the Power Query interface to establish a connection to multiple data sources and bring that into the data lake that way. The connection string, obviously, to a Power BI report, if you're doing your ETL process prior to the data lake, that makes it a single connection. And then, obviously all of your combining and sources and everything do inside of your data transformation prior to the data lake. The connector over to the Tableau, once it's all combined, gosh, I would think that the sky is the limit there of if you're connecting to a single data set that's being stored, already combined and already grouped together inside of the data lake. I don't see any limitations there. I'm not sure if that's answering your question, Alex.
Yes, yes, yes. That's answering my question, sir.
Okay,
Do,
fantastic.
do you like is any specific ETL tool name you can mention for that?
There's a couple different ones that I use for analysis. I will tell you that anything that gets me close to a Power Query interface, I prefer. So that gets me into a whole bunch of different areas via either Power Apps or inside of Fabric, taking a look at that Data Flow Gen 2. If I can find something where it's got my steps listed out to the right, which saves me a lot of documentation time, that's my preference. Now, with that being said, if I'm doing analysis to try and learn about the data source so I can figure out how I'm going to form that in there, I use KNIME a lot. So KNIME, a whole bunch of VS Code tools, and that also requires plugins, of course, and even just a simple SSRS. I deal with a lot of Microsoft products inside of my source sets, so that's not particularly foreign, especially if I'm connected to something like a Cosmic database inside of Azure.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely. And Chris, I'm looking at, looks like Daniel had a question.
Yeah, he's asking if, in regards to artificial keys, are there any things to look out for when building them?
This sounds simple, data types. Gosh, I cannot tell you how many times I've looked at some sample data and I go, oh, that's obviously a number without verifying, oh, it's actually stored as a string. That has cost me hours and for very silly reasons. So pay attention to your data types.
Yeah, no, you bring up a very good point. Power Query is a great tool, but when it comes to data types, it gets a little funky, and there's a lot of hidden landmines you got to keep an eye on. I don't know if you've seen this too, but when going from whether it's just one Power Query step to the next, or you're connecting from one data flow and you have connecting to another data flow, sometimes those data types they change and they default or they become unassigned.
Yep.
And if you're not careful and you don't pay attention to it, man, you're banging your head against the computer trying to figure out what's going on. And it's just
For sure.
something simple.
And sticking just inside of the Power BI realm, for those that are operating on Power BI desktop, that setting inside of your options of whether to auto detect, which I have on most of the time, I admit, boy, that's one you can't take for granted because it only takes a look at the first couple hundred rows of your data to be able to guess what type of data you're looking at. And then looks like Daniel did a little bit follow up here. With splitting queries, safe to assume it's better to have many small queries rather than one large one in regard to performance. Oh, great question, Daniel. So I'm going to tie this into what Alex was talking about earlier of, hey, where's your ETL transformation happening? Is it happening prior to a data lake? Is it happening before it actually gets to your visualization step inside of Power BI? And that's going to very frequently dictate what makes the most sense. Gosh, I should really take down my slideshow so you can bring that joke back up, Chris.
Yeah, I can pull it up.
Yeah, please do. Generally speaking, whatever it is you're looking to transform, earlier transformation is it's not always everybody's favorite, but it really does you some really good service for making opportunities. And what I mean by saying that is if you're doing your transformation early enough at a source inside of Power BI, or for Tableau for that matter, whatever your different source is, I have no problem whatsoever with making a large table as long as the source is managing all the combination of small elements. So I'm kind of waffling about that because there's obviously variations and changes in there. It's not a solid rule of thumb. If I can get all of my data from one single large query on a single data source, I'll consider that first. So not a definitive answer, Daniel. I'm sorry, there probably isn't one, but that's kind of how I look at it from a philosophy standpoint. I'm not sure if that answered your question or not, or just added more questions.
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer in just
Yeah.
a few minutes. That's the common consultant question or answer is it depends.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah.
But as far as pushing everything upstream, that's spot on with that, pushing it upstream as far as possible.
Mhm.
That's gonna be your best bet. You can't go wrong there.
I will add on to this, just maybe to give Daniel a little bit more definitive answer. I have no problem combining into large queries per source because I can always break them into smaller pieces once I get the data. Maybe that's a little
Yeah.
more concise.
Yeah, and I think one of the benefits also with or to keep in mind with Power Query is that it is an enterprise grade tool. So
Okay.
it is a tool that can handle a large amount of data set or a large amount of records. Keep in mind that if you have a very long table, you're going to want it to be as skinny as possible. Or if you have a wider table, you're going to want that one to be as shorter as possible. But there's also a point where too long is just too long. There's been some demonstrations out there where it can handle over 1 million rows. But at some point it's going to tap out, and that's where you really need to bring in the big boys where you have your databases, your Snowflake, and you have your ingestion not in Power Query, but on the database side. So
Right.
that's just it depends on what type of or what size of data you're working with.
Yep. 100%. I'll also just say, I know today I've really been focused on Power BI, but since Alex asked about Data Lake, don't be afraid to investigate inside of the Fabric the data mirroring function. So if you've got like an AWS backend or something that, hey, you're really looking to optimize, using the shortcut functionality inside of Fabric is great. It's quick. It's based on the Parquet language underneath, which we don't have to get too far into it, but it's super efficient too. There might be some opportunities to streamline inside of doing a mirrored set or a shortcut rather to an alternate data set inside of your lakehouse.
So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to chime in. Kind of leaning on the lake house. So we've got the Power BI desktop where you've got Power Query and you ingest it in there. And then you mentioned the lake house. So for someone that is new to this, what's the difference and how do you decide which one to use?
Yeah.
I would put you on the spot for that.
Oh gosh. Can I just say it depends again and call it good? No, I apologize. So there is not a definitive answer. If it works is going to be my first real answer. We, especially at CIPCO, we take a look at a whole bunch of different structures. So we've got items that are streamlined by operating on on-prem SQL. We've got operations that are streamlined by operating inside of Azure, which sidebar, a lake house and also data lake resources inside of Fabric actually reside in Azure on the back end. So deciding when to use what, I suppose a simple way of looking at it, not definitive and certainly not exhaustive, is if you need things to be optimized locally because you've got data entry or local reporting that serves your business better, maybe a lakehouse isn't for you because it's got to reach out to the cloud every time. It's super fast. It's a great system. But if your priority is for local optimization, that would be one of the yellow flags I would look at to say, okay, maybe a lakehouse isn't my go-to. That being said, a lakehouse and data lakes are kind of Microsoft standards that they're looking at for Fabric organization now, or just a simple data warehouse repository. Oh, and by the way, they're also doing SQL Server mirroring inside of Fabric as well now. Really, all it boils down to is, do you need it to operate more efficiently in the cloud, or do you need it to operate more efficiently in a localized database? Or back to the, if it works, it works. If your current solution doesn't seem to have any further need for optimization at this point in time, sure, play around with the lakehouse, but maybe it isn't the right fit yet. Or maybe it won't be. Back to, it depends.
Yeah, no, you're right. There is no one answer for it. There's so many different scenarios and different caveats, and everyone's got their own specific needs where that can help determine one versus the other.
For sure. And we've looked at all different variations of this. And I will tell you, there are some spots where we've definitively decided, oh, our performance has to be on site. We don't go to a lake house for that information.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, because that you bring up, it's very interesting with the whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, especially with nowadays, everyone's going towards cloud, and
Sure.
there's still very real use cases to keep things on-prem.
Absolutely. It's doing the accounting work is really the deciding factor on a lot of these. Does it make sense to run actual hardware, or does it make more sense to do a fee where, hey, it might be cheaper overall rather than having maintenance run in a server room in the back?
Yep.
Yep.
Very true.
I will entertain, I think we've got a minute if there's maybe one more question before I need to hand it back over to you, Chris, for closing comments.
Anyone else want to close us out with one last question?
Yep. And thanks to Alex and Daniel. Oh, and thank you, Jade. Appreciate it. Well, I will leave it there then and say, Chris, thanks again for the opportunity to chat with all of you, and reach out if we want to talk again.
Yeah, it looks like we got Thomas who's typing. Let's just see if he has one question. But while he types that, Nathan, yeah, thank you very much. Fantastic presentation, very insightful, and truly a lot of very useful tips that we can get going and using. So thank you very much for that. Fantastic conversation as well.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
All right. Well, it looks like Thomas said thank you. All right. Well, folks, that's it. I hope y'all have a wonderful day and a wonderful afternoon. And again, Nathan, thank you for your time, and everybody have a wonderful rest of your day.